The building was tall and shiny, one of the most expensive in Tokyo. Its floors polished like mirrors, its walls made of glass and steel. And the people inside wore suits that cost more than what some earned in a month, but no one paid attention. To the woman with the mop in her hand, her name was Amina, and every night she came when most people were leaving. Pushing her cleaning cart down long, silent hallways, she wore a faded blue uniform. Her hair tied back, her skin dark, and her eyes. Tired but alert, she did her job carefully. Never rushing, always silent, like a shadow no one cared to see. The workers who stayed late would sometimes walk past her, too busy or too proud to notice her nod or quiet greeting. She was just the cleaner, someone invisible in their busy world. Amina knew every inch of that building. She knew which elevator made a soft clicking noise, which desk drawers were never locked, and which managers stayed late only to nap in their chairs. She was the silent watcher, moving from floor to floor, making sure everything looked perfect. By morning, but no one ever asked her name. No one ever asked where she came from, or why she was there. Sometimes they would talk near her, the employees laughing or gossiping in Japanese, assuming she couldn't understand a word. They said things that would have made them blush with shame if they knew the truth. One night, a young man called her useless in Japanese, adding that she probably didn't even know what country she was in. His friends laughed, and they walked away without a second thought. But Amina had understood every single word. She kept her face calm, her eyes down, but inside, her heart grew colder, not with hate, but with sadness. They didn't know that she spoke Japanese better than some of them. They didn't know that once, long ago, she stood on a stage in Tokyo University, giving a speech in front of professors and ambassadors. They didn't know that she had earned a scholarship with her brilliance, or that she once dreamed of becoming a diplomat, but that dream had died quietly when her husband died suddenly in a car accident back in Nairobi. She was left alone with a small child and a broken heart. She had no time for dreams, only survival, and so she came back to Japan, not as a student, but as a worker, and the only job she could find that allowed her to care for her son and send money home was this one, the one with the mop. She never told anyone about her past. Not because she was ashamed, but because no one had ever asked. To them, she was just a cleaner, and in this world, cleaners didn't get stories. They got instructions. Her hands were rough now, her back sometimes ached, but she never complained. She had dignity in her silence, strength in her work, and more knowledge in her mind than anyone guessed. That night, around 11 p.m., she was cleaning the executive hallway, the one lined with private offices and meeting rooms. The floors were marble and the lights low. The air smelled like expensive coffee and cold steel. She moved quietly, sweeping near the glass wall when a group of junior employees walked past. Talking loudly, laughing, and pretending to work late, one of them looked at her and said in Japanese, "I don't get why they even let people like her into the building." Amina didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at the floor and kept sweeping, but deep inside, something stirred. She had been patient for so long, invisible for too long, and she wondered if anyone would ever see her for who she really was. A few minutes later, she heard another group talking excitedly. They said the CEO was coming the next morning. A surprise visit. Everyone was nervous. People were talking about cleaning their desks, preparing reports, and acting more formal than usual. Amina smiled softly, because for her, every night was a surprise inspection. She had no days off, no assistants, and no one watching her work. But she made sure every corner of that floor was spotless, not for praise, but because she believed in doing things well, even when no one was watching. As she mopped the last stretch of hallway, she paused for a second and looked at the reflection of herself in the glass. Behind her uniform, she still saw the smart, proud woman she used to be. She whispered something in Japanese to herself. Just a small sentence, but it sounded like music. If anyone had been there to hear it, they would have been stunned, but no one was there, only Amina, the cleaner no one really saw. The woman they all ignored. Not knowing that she was about to shock the entire company. Not knowing that within days, the same woman they overlooked would speak in the boardroom. And the same floor she mopped would echo with her voice that night as she finished and turned. Off the lights, she didn't feel invisible anymore. Something was coming, and deep inside, Amina knew her silence wouldn't last much longer. The world would hear her, and it would begin with a single perfect sentence in flawless Japanese. The next morning, the building buzzed with quiet panic. Everyone had heard the news. The CEO was coming, Mr. Yamato Takeda, the founder of the company, a millionaire many times over. A man known for his sharp eyes and even sharper decisions. He rarely visited the main office, but when he did, people remembered it for weeks. Meetings were canceled, desks were cleared, employees dressed extra neat. And even the coffee smelled more expensive. Mina arrived early, just like always. She wore the same faded uniform, her cleaning gloves tucked into her pocket, her face calm as ever. But the mood in the air felt different today. People were moving faster, whispering, checking their hair and collars in every reflection they passed. The fear of being noticed by the CEO made them all alert. But no one looked at Amina. They never did. She continued her usual routine, sweeping near the executive floor, wiping the glass panels and polishing the floor tiles until they shined like water. As she worked near the hallway corner, she heard fast footsteps. Then a tall man in a sharp black suit turned the corner and walked straight toward her. It was him, Mr. Yamato. Takeda. He was alone, his face unreadable, his eyes scanning everything and everyone. He had the energy of someone who didn't waste time. The kind of man who built empires by making decisions faster than others could think. He was checking everything, the walls, the lights, the desk arrangements. Even the way the chairs were placed. He passed by two assistants who bowed low and greeted him. He nodded, but didn't stop walking. Then it happened. He turned the corner to enter the main hallway. He collided slightly with Amina, just enough to make the papers in his hand fall to the floor. It was a small moment, but in the world of perfection he expected. It was like thunder. The assistants gasped quietly, unsure whether to run forward or stay frozen, but Amina didn't panic. She immediately knelt down and began picking up the papers, arranging them neatly, her hands quick but gentle. She handled the documents with respect, as if she knew they were important. She didn't say a word, didn't even look up. She just focused on her task with calm grace. Mr. Takeda looked at her for a brief second, expecting perhaps a bow or an apology in broken Japanese. But Amina simply handed him the papers, perfectly aligned, and gave a soft nod. He took them and muttered under his breath in Japanese, "I'm surrounded by incompetence," not even expecting her to understand. Just releasing his frustration out loud. But then something happened that made time stop. Amina raised her eyes slowly and said in fluent, clear, and respectful Japanese, "I believe your documents are in perfect order." Takeda-sama, the assistants behind him, blinked. Confused, Mr. Takeda turned around, thinking maybe he heard wrong, but her eyes were steady, her voice confident, her pronunciation perfect. Not just good native level, the kind of Japanese that only comes from years of living, studying and thinking in the language. He stared at her, no longer seeing just the cleaner, but something he didn't understand, something unexpected, something that didn't fit the picture he had in his mind. There was silence for a long moment. One of the assistants dropped her tablet and surprised Amina, gave a small bow, and turned back to her cleaning cart as if nothing had happened. Takeda stood there for a few seconds more, his brain trying to process what he just witnessed. Then he walked away, slower this time, deep in thought, but behind him Whispers began to spread like wildfire. The cleaner just spoke Japanese, not just spoke it, but used honorific language, business, tone. Like someone trained in etiquette and diplomacy, people started asking questions. Who is she? Where did she learn that? Why is she working as a cleaner if she can speak like that? No one had answers. Sichar had no special note in her file. No impressive degree listed, just basic information. Her name, her ID, her shift time, nothing more. No one had ever bothered to ask about her life before she wore the cleaning uniform that afternoon. Amina kept working like usual, but now she felt the stares, not from disgust or indifference, but from curiosity. People who once ignored her now watched her every movement, wondering if she would speak again, wondering what other secrets she carried behind her quiet smiles. She heard some people say, maybe it was a trick. Maybe she just memorized one sentence. Others believed she must have been someone important once, someone who lost everything. But Amina didn't care about their guessing. She had spoken not to impress anyone, but because she had dignity. And she wouldn't stay silent while someone insulted her in a language they thought she couldn't understand that night. After her shift, she walked out of the building with the same slow steps. But something had changed. The building had finally seen her. Not fully, not yet. But enough to start a ripland somewhere on the top floor. Mr. Takeda sat alone in his office, staring at the folder in his hands. A folder with no answers, just a name, Amina. He whispered it softly to himself, as if trying to connect the sound of it with the image of the woman on the hallway floor. Then for the first time in a long time, he was curious not about numbers or market shares, but about a person. A woman who didn't belong in the world of mops and silence, yet chose to live in ETH, didn't know it yet. But that one sentence in Japanese had started something far bigger than anyone expected. Something that would soon shake the company from its polished floors to its glass ceiling. And Amina, the cleaner they all ignored, was finally being seen. The moment Amina spoke in Japanese, something changed in the building. It was as if a switch had been turned on. Like the walls had ears and the floors carried stories. The assistants who witnessed it couldn't stop talking. The cleaner had not only spoken, but had spoken with grace and power. The kind of voice that made you stop and listen. By lunch that day, the story had already traveled through 3 floors. People whispered about her in elevators, in hallways, and even in the break room. They stared when she passed, trying not to be obvious, but failing. Some were in disbelief. Others were simply curious. The quiet black cleaner, the one they never noticed before, had become the center of attention without saying another word. Some thought she was faking it. Maybe she had practiced that one sentence. Others said she might be an undercover inspector hired by the CEO himself. A few said she was probably someone famous who had fallen on hard times, but no one actually asked her. They just watched her from a distance, trying to put together the puzzle in their heads. I noticed the stares, but said nothing. She moved through the building like always, cleaning floors, wiping glass, collecting trash. But now her steps felt heavier. Not because of fear, but because of pressure. She had spoken her truth once, and now everyone was looking for more. Later that evening, a small group of junior employees gathered near the reception area, the same ones who used to laugh near her, as if she didn't exist. Now they stood there whispering like school children, watching her work and wondering how much she had understood from the past. They remembered the jokes, the rude comments in Japanese, the moments they assumed she was nothing more than a body with a mop. One of them, a young woman named Sak, approached Amina while she was polishing the elevator panel. She said softly, "Excuse me, miss, do you really speak Japanese?" Her voice shook just a little. Amina looked up and gave her a kind smile, then replied in perfect Japanese again, "Yes, I do. I studied here long ago." Saki nodded, unsure what to say next. then simply bowed and walked away quickly. Her face read the whispers only grew louder after that than the top office. Mr. Takeda was still thinking about the moment from the morning. It had bothered him all day, not in a bad way, in a way that made him restless. It was rare for anything to surprise him, but that woman, the cleaner, had done it without effort. He had meetings to attend, contracts to sign, reports to approve. But his mind kept going back to her eyes, her voice, and how calm she had been. He finally asked his assistant to bring him her file, just to understand who she was. The assistant came back 20 minutes later with a thin envelope. No degrees, no past job titles, just a few notes from the cleaning agency. Her name, her age, her citizenship, and her work hours. That was it. Not a single thing that explained the power behind her voice. This doesn't make sense. Takeda whispered, tapping the folder with his pen. He had built his empire by spotting talent where others didn't look. And now, right in the middle of his clean glass palace, there was someone hiding in plain sight. The next day, Amina arrived early again, but this time, something was different. People greeted her, not everyone, but a few staff nodded at her politely. One security guard even offered her tea. She accepted it with a soft thank you, then continued with her duties. She didn't change her pace or her smile, but inside, she could feel it. The building had finally noticed her around noon. Two men in suits approached her near the supply closet. They were from Human Resources, and they spoke carefully, choosing polite words. They asked if she could come to the office for a quick conversation. She wiped her hands and followed them quietly. Her heart calm, but her mind alert. In the HR room, she was welcomed with nervous smiles. They offered her a seat and some water, and then began asking questions. Simple at first: where she learned Japanese, what her background was, how long she had been in Japan, and what she studied. Amina answered honestly. She told them about her scholarship, her degree in international relations, her time at the embassy, her fluency in Swahili, English, and Japanese, and how life had changed after her husband's death. She said everything softly, without showing sadness or pride. Just the truth. By the time she finished, the two HR staff were looking at her like she was a rare painting they had walked past 1,000 times without noticing. Later that afternoon, the HR team sent a message directly to the CEO, and within an hour, Mr. Takeda made a call that surprised the entire building. He invited Amina to lunch, cleaner invited to dine with the CEO. When the news reached the employees, the reaction was explosive. Some thought it was fake, some were jealous, others waited near the elevators just to see if it was true. But Amina, in her same uniform, calmly walked into the executive lounge and sat across from the man who ran the company. No one could hear what they talked about, but everyone was watching. The woman they used to ignore was now having lunch with the boss. And it wasn't by luck or accident. It was because she opened her mouth and reminded them all that intelligence doesn't wear a suit, and wisdom doesn't need permission to speak. And in that moment, even though she said very little, Amina's silence spoke louder than any of their gossip ever could. The cleaner had become the mystery of the building, and mysteries always attract attention. That night, after her shift, Amina walked slowly to her small apartment. The air outside was cool, and the streets were quiet. Her building was old, with cracked steps and peeling paint, but it was safe and close to the school her son attended. As she walked up the stairs, she thought about everything that had happened at work. The whispers, the questions, the lunch invitation, it all felt strange. Like someone had suddenly opened a door that had always been locked inside her apartment. She placed her cleaning bag near the wall and checked on her son. He was already asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. She kissed his forehead and sat by the window, her thoughts drifting back to a time long ago. A time when she had been full of dreams and possibilities. Years ago, Amina had been a student. Not just an ordinary student, but one of the top students in her country. She had earned a scholarship to study in Japan, and it had been the proudest moment of her life. Her parents cried when she left, not because they were sad, but because they believed she was going to change the world in Japan. She studied international relations, politics, and global cultures. She spoke 3 languages and picked up Japanese quickly. She had a gift for communication, and her professors often said she would make a great diplomat. During one summer, she even interned at the Kenyan embassy in Tokyo, working with real diplomats and helping with translation and cultural programs. But life changed when she met Daniel, a fellow student from Nairobi. He was kind, funny, and full of dreams like hers. They fell in love, got married quietly, and after graduation, returned home together. Things were not perfect, but they were happy. Then their son was born, and life felt complete until the accident had happened one rainy night when Daniel was driving. Back from work, a drunk driver ran a red light and crashed into him. Amina still remembered the call, the sound of the doctor's voice, the moment her knees gave out. Everything after that felt like a blur. She had lost not just her husband, but also her partner, her support, her future with no stable job and a child to raise. Amina made the hardest decision of her life. She left her home and returned to Japan. This time not as a student or diplomat, but as a mother trying to survive. The embassy job had already been filled. No one wanted a young widow with a baby, and slowly, she had to accept the only job offered. Cleaning. She had been working ever since. Quiet, focused, never telling anyone who she used to be. She cleaned because it paid the rent, because it fed her son, because it gave her just enough time to walk him to school and pick him up. Her dreams were not gone, only buried under responsibility back. In the present, she looked at her reflection in the window glass. Her hands were tired, her shoulders heavy, but her eyes were still sharp. Still filled with something people at work had failed to notice. Strength. Next morning, when she arrived at work, something was different again. A woman from HR was waiting for her at the side door. She handed her a small envelope with a polite smile and said, "Mr. Takeda would like to see you again. Please read this." Inside, the envelope was a formal letter, beautifully printed, inviting her to a private lunch with the CEO again. Not in the lounge, but in his own office. It also asked if she could bring a copy of her past academic qualifications and work experience. Amina folded the letter quietly and nodded, then went to start her shift. She didn't have a proper resume anymore, but she still had old documents stored in a drawer at home. Copies of her degree, her award letters, her internship certificate. Things she hadn't looked at in years. That night she dusted them off and packed them neatly in a folder. When the lunch day came, Amina arrived not in her uniform, but in a clean, simple dress. One she had saved for special moments. The receptionist almost didn't recognize her. People stared again, but this time not with confusion, this time with quiet respect. Inside the CEO's office, Mr. Takeda stood as she entered, something he did not do for most visitors. He welcomed her warmly and asked her to sit. He poured the tea himself, something that shocked his assistant. Then they talked about her education, her past, her dreams, her challenges, and what brought her back to Japan. Amina answered everything honestly. She did not ask for pity, only spoke her truth. Takeda listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions, his eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, he sat in silence for a few moments, then leaned forward and said, "You do not belong in the shadows, Amina. I want to offer you a chance. A real one." She looked at him, unsure what he meant. He smiled and continued, "I want you to join our executive training program. It's not easy, but I believe you have more potential than most people here. And I would like to see what happens if that potential is allowed to rise." Amina blinked. Slowly, her hands trembling just a little. She had expected a kind word, maybe a thank you. But this was more than she ever imagined. She bowed deeply, her voice soft. "Thank you, Takeda-sama. I will do my best." and just like that, the woman no one had seen for months, the cleaner with the quiet eyes, was being lifted into a place where her voice would finally be heard, not because of luck, not because someone felt sorry, but because she had always belonged there. Even if the world had forgotten it, the journey ahead would not be easy. But for the first time in years, Amina felt something rise inside her again: hope. The news spread across the office like fire on dry grass. People could hardly believe what they heard. Amina, the cleaner they had walked past for months, was now in the executive training program. It didn't feel real. Some people thought it was a joke. Others whispered that she must have some secret connection with the CEO. And a few believed it was just a one-time gesture of kindness that would fade away in a week. But it wasn't a joke. And it wasn't kindness. It was real. On Monday morning, Amina walked into the office, not in her cleaner's uniform, but in a simple business suit. It wasn't new, but it was neatly pressed and fit her perfectly. She held a notebook and a pen in her hand, her expression calm, but her heart beating a little faster than usual. The receptionist stood up when she saw her, unsure if she should greet her the way she did other executives. Amina just smiled politely and walked to the elevator. This time not to clean the top floor, but to be part of the executive training room. There were 12 people, all chosen for their skills, experience, or high performance. They were surprised to see Amina walk in and take a seat among them. Some raised their eyebrows, others looked at her with curiosity. One man even leaned over and whispered, "Are you in the right place?" Amina turned to him and replied softly, "Yes, I am," and then opened her notebook. The training began. The speaker introduced the program, explained the expectations, and spoke about international projects, partnerships, and strategy. Amina listened closely, taking notes, asking questions, and thinking deeply. It had been years since she sat in a room like this, but her mind was sharp, her memory strong, and her hunger to learn even stronger than before. At lunch, a few trainees went to eat together. Amina sat alone near the window with her packed lunch. She didn't mind. She was used to being alone. But even from her corner, she was observing everything. The conversations, the personalities, the ones who were loud, the ones who pretended to know more than they did, and the few who were actually humble. Later in the afternoon, Mr. Takeda himself came in to speak to the trainees. He gave a short speech about leadership, responsibility, and vision, then paused, looked directly at Amina, and said, "Sometimes the best talent is the one that was ignored. I hope you all keep your eyes open and your hearts wider." Everyone in the room turned to look at her. And for the first time, some of them smiled, not fake smiles, but real ones. Over the next few weeks, Amina worked harder than anyone. She stayed late reading reports, asked questions most didn't even think about, and slowly began to win the respect of the others. Her background was still a mystery to many, but her intelligence and discipline were now impossible to ignore. One day, during a group project, the team was struggling to prepare a presentation for a potential partnership with a Kenyan tech firm. None of them understood the cultural practices or business style of the African market. Amina, who had been silent until then, asked if she could try. She stood up, picked up the marker, and began explaining everything step by step, from greetings to negotiation style, from timelines to gift-giving customs. She even translated a few phrases that would make the proposal more respectful. The room was silent, not because they were bored, but because they were shocked. They had been struggling for hours, and Amina had solved the problem in 5 minutes. One trainee clapped softly, then the rest joined in, and for the first time, Amina felt like she truly belonged thereafter. The meeting, the project manager approached her and said, "You just saved this deal, and for the first time in a long time." Amina smiled, not out of politeness, but out of pride. Back in the main office, things were also changing. People who once ignored her now greeted her. Some even apologized for how they treated her. She accepted their words with grace. Never holding on to bitterness, she didn't seek revenge. She didn't need to prove anyone wrong. Her success was her proof. She still passed by the janitorial closet sometimes and greeted the cleaning staff. They looked at her with wide eyes. "And respect," one of them asked shyly. "Will you forget us now?" Amina replied gently, "How could I forget where I came from?" Her son, too, noticed the change. He would run into her arms after school and say, "Mama, you look like a boss now," and she would laugh. Not because she cared about being a boss, but because she was building something better for him. 4. Both of them, Mr. Takeda, continued to follow her progress closely. Each week impressed him more. She wasn't just smart, she had something more. Something he rarely saw: humility with strength, kindness with knowledge, power without arrogance. He began thinking of new roles for her, larger ones, maybe even international. He knew she was special. Not just for the company, but as a person who could inspire others. Amina didn't think about the future too much. She took one day at a time, one lesson at a time. But deep inside, she knew something had shifted. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer the woman with the mop. She was Amina. The woman with a voice, with purpose. With a story the world was finally starting to hear, and her journey was only just beginning. Weeks passed, and Amina's name was no longer whispered in confusion or surprise. Now people said it with respect, with interest, sometimes even with a bit of jealousy. She was no longer just the cleaner who shocked everyone. She had become part of something bigger, something real, something that could not be undone. Each morning, she walked into the building with quiet confidence. Not loud, not proud, just calm and steady. She still greeted the cleaning staff, still smiled at the receptionist, still carried herself with the same humility, but her eyes now held something stronger: clarity. Inside the executive training program, she had become one of the top trainees. Her reports were sharp, her questions were deep, her solutions were practical. One by one, the other trainees started asking for her help. They wanted her opinion, her guidance. Even the ones who once doubted her now invited her into team discussions, because they had seen her work and could no longer ignore her brilliance. One day, Mr. Takeda's personal assistant entered the training room with a special announcement. The CEO was starting a new project and expansion into African markets, and he needed someone to take the lead on communication and cultural alignment. The assistant said Takeda had personally asked for one trainee to be assigned to the project. Then she looked directly at Amina and said her name. The room went silent. Everyone turned to her. Amina stood slowly, her voice steady as she replied, "I would be honored." Later that day, she was given a small team and a private room to begin preparing for the project. Her task was to help the company form new partnerships with African tech companies. She had to study local business customs, review laws, and prepare materials in both English and Swahili. She also had to guide Japanese staff on how to interact with partners from a different culture. It was not easy. Some employees outside the training program complained. They said she had skipped the ladder, that she was moving too fast. Some even whispered that she was only chosen because of her background, not because of her skill. But Amina ignored the noise. She focused on the work, because she knew where she came from, and she knew what she could do. Every evening after her meetings, she still went home to her small apartment, cooked dinner for her son, helped him with homework, and tucked him into bed. Then she stayed up late reading reports and preparing presentations, her eyes tired, but her heart strong. Soon, the project reached a critical stage. An important client from Nairobi was flying in for a live business presentation. It was a big deal, the kind that could bring millions to the company. Many people worked on the presentation, but Amina was the one who had to deliver the main speech. The day of the meeting, she wore a soft blue suit and a calm smile. She stood in front of a room full of executives, both Japanese and African. and began her presentation with a simple greeting in Swahili. The room warmed instantly. She then continued in fluent English, switching between languages like a master, explaining ideas, sharing research, and connecting cultures in every word. The end of the presentation, there was silence, but not from boredom. From amazement, then came the applause. Loud, real applause. The African client stood up, walked to her, and said, "You speak like a bridge between two worlds." After the meeting, Mr. Takeda invited her to his office again. This time, he did not ask questions. He simply said, "You have done something remarkable, not just for the company, but for the future." He handed her a new contract, offering her a permanent position as cultural liaison and global project manager. It was not just a title, it was a doorway, a path into the executive world she once only cleaned around. Amina signed the papers with steady hands and quiet tears in her eyes. She whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." And Takeda replied, "Thank you for proving everyone wrong, including me." Back in her apartment, her son saw the new ID card and the company logo. He asked, "Mama, are you the boss now?" And she smiled, kissed his cheek, and said, "Not the boss, but someone who finally gets to be heard." At work, she now had her own office. A small one, but full of sunlight. Her name was on the door, and people knocked before entering. The same hallway she once mopped was now the hallway where she led meetings. The same people who once walked past her now stood to greet her hand. Yet, she didn't change who she was. She still greeted the janitors. Every morning, she still cleaned her own desk. She still walked with quiet steps. But now every step echoed. One afternoon, a young woman from the cleaning team approached her nervously. She looked down and said, "You give us hope." Amina held her hand and said gently, "You already have everything inside you. All you need is a moment to show it." Her journey had started in silence, in forgotten corners and lonely nights. But now, her voice had become something others listened to, respected, and followed. She had risen not by shouting, not by demanding, but by being excellent in silence until the world had no choice but to hear her hand. Even now, she remained a symbol of something more powerful than status. She was proof that no one is truly invisible, just unseen, till they shine. Amina now walked through the building not as a cleaner, but as a respected professional. Yet she never acted like she was better than anyone. She still smiled at the cleaning staff, still bowed politely to the guards, and still remembered every corner of the building she once polished. Some people forgot where they came from when they rose up, but not her. She carried her past with quiet pride. Like a badge, no one could steal. Her office was small but bright, with a window that looked out over the city. The nameplate on her door said Amina Njiroj, Cultural Liaison. It was the first time her name had been placed on a door in Japan, not as a cleaner, not as a number, but as someone who belonged. She arrived early every morning, long before most staff, and began reviewing papers, organizing meetings, or preparing reports. Her work was no longer about just completing tasks. It was about making a difference, building bridges between cultures, helping people understand each other, and bringing value to a company that once didn't even notice her. One morning, she received a message saying the CEO wanted her to speak at an internal leadership meeting. Not just attend, but speak. Many senior managers would be there, people who had worked for the company for years, people who had degrees from elite universities and titles behind their names. And now she was being asked to stand in front of them and share her journey. She sat quietly at her desk for a while, the invitation in her hand, her heart full of emotions, not fear, but weight. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about every unseen worker, every ignored voice, every immigrant who had to start from the bottom with dreams still burning in their heart when the day arrived. The conference room was filled with serious faces and straight backs. People talked softly before the session, but everyone turned when Amina walked to the front of the room. Dressed in a graceful suit, her posture calm, Her presence strong, she began speaking. First in Japanese, then in English, her voice soft but steady. She told them about her childhood in Nairobi, her scholarship, her dreams, her husband, and the moment everything changed when he passed away. She spoke about coming back to Japan with a baby and a broken future. Taking the only job available, cleaning floors in a building she once dreamed of working inside. She paused, looked around the room, and continued. I was here, all this time, but no one saw me. Her words were not angry, they were honest. But I didn't stop being who I was. Just because no one noticed, there was complete silence, not a single phone buzzed, not a whisper, not even the sound of papers moving. She had captured the room with nothing but truth. She ended by saying, sometimes the greatest talent is hiding where no one is looking, not because they're not capable, but because they've been labeled before they were heard. I'm not asking for kindness, I'm asking for awareness. The room stayed silent even after she finished. Then slowly, one person began to clap. Then another, and then the entire room stood up. The applause was long, real, and filled with respect. After the meeting, people came up to her. Not with empty praise, but with genuine words. A senior manager said, "You reminded me why I joined this company." Another said, "You made me see things I had been blind to for years." Later that day, Mr. Takada called her into his office again. He looked at her with pride and said, "You've done more than change your position. You've changed the heart of this company." He told her that from now on, every new employee, no matter what department, would hear her story as part of their orientation. Not because it was inspiring, but because it was necessary. A few weeks later, Amina's story was published on the company's internal website. Then a journalist picked it up, and soon a major newspaper ran the headline, "From Cleaner to Leader: The Journey of Amina Najiroch." The article went viral. People across Japan and around the world read her story. Messages poured in, from young girls, immigrants, single mothers, even business leaders, thanking her for sharing her truth. One day, the same junior staff who used to mock her in the hallway came to her office. They looked nervous, carrying a small gift bag. Inside was a tiny handmade paper crane, folded carefully with a note that said, "We're sorry for not seeing you. Thank you for teaching us what true strength looks like." Amina took the crane in her hand and smiled, not with pride, not with victory, but with understanding. She said, "It's never too late to open your eyes." That night, when she got home, her son ran to her and hugged her tight. He had a drawing in his hand. It showed a tall building, a small woman standing in front, and a golden crown above her head. He said, "I told my teacher my mom is a queen," and she laughed through quiet tears, not because of the crown, but because her son had always seen her for who she was, even when the world didn't. Building she once cleaned now echoed with her footsteps in a different way. Her story had become a light, shining through glass walls and silent rooms, reminding everyone that respect has nothing to do with titles, and potential has nothing to do with uniforms. She didn't need revenge or loud speeches. She didn't ask to be lifted. She just rose, because when truth is carried with grace, even the tallest walls cannot keep it hidden. Amina had become more than just a name. She had become a symbol, a voice that could no longer be ignored. 1 year after Amina first spoke that one sentence in Japanese, the company looked very different. People greeted each other more kindly. They paid attention to the quiet ones. They respected every worker, no matter what job they had, and many said it was because of her. Her story had touched something deep in the hearts of everyone who heard it. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Amina now worked as a global cultural manager. Her role included guiding international deals, helping teams understand other cultures, and mentoring younger employees from different backgrounds. Her office had grown a little larger. Her team had grown too. And her voice was now part of almost every big decision the company made. But she never changed. She still brought her lunch from home. still walked past the janitor's room to say hello, still helped new staff find their way around. People respected her not just for what she did, but for who she was. A woman who rose without stepping on anyone, a woman who taught others not with words, but with action. She had started a small mentorship group for women and immigrant workers. Inside the company, they met every Friday after work, sat in a quiet room, and shared stories, challenges, and dreams. Amina listened to each one, sometimes giving advice, sometimes just holding space. One woman said, "I used to think I didn't matter here, but now I feel seen." One day, Amina received an email from a university, the same one where she had once studied. They had heard about her journey through a news article and wanted to invite her as a guest speaker at their graduation ceremony. At first, Amina hesitated. She didn't see herself as someone who gives speeches, but after some thought, she agreed the day of the event. She stood on the same stage she once stood on as a student. Only now she was different, wiser, stronger, and full of memories. The hall was filled with students from many countries, dressed in gowns, ready to face the world. Amina looked at them and began to speak. She told them about life, not just success, but pain, loss, and the courage it takes to keep going when everything falls apart. She said, "Success is not about how fast you rise, but about how deep your roots are when the storm hits." The audience listened quietly, some with tears in their eyes, others nodding slowly, feeling her words in their bones when she finished. The crowd stood up and clapped for a long time. Some students ran to her after the ceremony, asking for photos, asking for her to sign their programs, not because she was famous, but because she was real back in the company. Amina was given one more role, this time by Mr. Takeda himself. He invited her to be on the board of advisors for diversity and leadership. She would help shape the future of hiring, training, and culture at every level of the company. Her journey, once invisible, had now become a path for others to walk on, but the most important moment of all came quietly. Without cameras or applause, it was a cold evening, and Amina was walking to the train station after work. She wore a long coat, carried her bag over one shoulder, and moved slowly through the crowd as she reached the corner near the buildings. Back entrance, she saw a young woman mopping the floor. Dressed in the same faded blue uniform Amina once wore, the girl looked tired. Her shoulders hunched, her eyes on the floor. Amina stopped. She stepped forward and said, "It's cold tonight, isn't it?" The girl looked up, surprised someone spoke to her, then nodded slowly. Amina smiled and said, "You're doing good work. I used to mop this hallway too." The girl stared at her, confused. Then she asked, "You worked here?" Amina nodded and replied, "Yes, and I still do, but in a different room now." The girl blinked, and for the first time that day, she smiled. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Amina gently touched her arm and said, "Don't let this job decide who you are. Your story isn't finished yet." As Amina walked away, the girl stood a little taller, her mop still in hand, but her heart lighter. That moment meant more to Amina than any title, any award, or any praise, because she knew the feeling of being unseen. And she also knew how powerful it was when someone simply noticed you. She went home that night and found her son asleep on the couch, books open beside him, a half-eaten cookie on the table. She covered him with a blanket, kissed his head, and sat by the window, looking out at the stars. Her life had changed. Not all at once, but one brave moment at a time. She didn't fight her way up with anger. She didn't demand to be noticed. She simply kept going, kept working, and waited for her chance to speak. And when the moment came, she spoke with truth. And the world listened. Amina had once been invisible. Now she was gettable, not because of where she ended up, but because of how she walked the road with grace, with strength, and with a voice that reminded everyone that greatness doesn't always enter with noise. Sometimes it enters with a mop in one hand, a quiet fire in the heart.